The ship came out of warp, like a stone thrown into still water, and for a moment, everything was light. Then the light faded, and Han Teho saw the stars. Not the stars he knew. Not the stars he had grown up watching from the rooftop of his grandmother's house in Busan. These were different. These were closer. These were wild and thick and burning in colors he had no words for, and they surrounded the largest structure he had ever seen in his life. It was a ring the size of a moon, spinning slowly in the dark, covered in lights that blinked, like a city that never slept. The Accord, the seat of the Galactic Council, home to over 9,000 species, and it was real. Teho let out a slow breath. Behind him, the bridge of the Mugunghwa was dead silent. Yun-Nari was the first to speak. She stood near the communications panel, her dark eyes wide, her fingers frozen over her keyboard. She was the ship's chief linguist, and she had spent 3 years learning every fragment of alien language that Earth scientists had pulled from the old signal. But now, seeing the station with her own eyes, words failed even her. "It's real," she whispered. "It's actually real." Bake Juno stood near the door, arms folded, his face showing nothing. He was the head of security, a former Marine who had served in 3 conflicts and never once raised his voice. He didn't speak. He just watched. Shin Boyong pressed her face against the viewport like a child at an aquarium. She was the ship's chief scientist, a biologist who had dreamed of alien life since she was 6 years old. Her breath fogged the glass. "Captain," she said, her voice shaking, "I count at least 40 different ship designs out there. 40 different species, at least." And then there was Kwan Do-hwa, the youngest of them all, sitting at the communications console with her headset on. She was 23. She had a photographic memory and a habit of biting her thumbnail when she was nervous. She was biting it now. "Captain," Do-hwa said quietly, "they're hailing us." Teho straightened his uniform. He was not a tall man, but he carried himself like someone who had decided long ago that height did not matter. "Put it through," he said. The screen filled with a face. It was not a human face. It was long and pale, with 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern and a mouth that opened sideways. The creature wore something like a robe, heavy with symbols. It stared at them for a long, long time. Then it spoke. The translation software caught it a second later, and Do-hwa's screen filled with text. "You are from the 3rd planet of the Yellow Star, Sector 7G, the quarantine zone." Teho frowned. "Quarantine zone?" The alien did not answer the question. "You will dock at Bay 94. You will not resist." The channel closed. Nari pulled off her headset slowly. Her face had changed. The wonder was gone. Something else had taken its place. "Captain," she said, "that wasn't a welcome. I've studied their greeting structures for years. The tone markers, the verb forms, everything. That was a containment protocol." Juno unfolded his arms. "So they're afraid of us." "Terrified," Nari said. "The word they used for our star system, it translates closest to forbidden ground." Teho looked at his crew. 5 humans, 1 small ship, 9,000 species on the other side of that docking bay. "We came here to say hello," he said. "So let's go say hello." They docked. The bay was enormous, large enough to hold 100 ships their size, but it was empty, completely empty. No other vessels, no workers, no one. Just a long white corridor leading into the station, lit by cold blue lights. They walked. Their footsteps echoed, and then the corridor opened into a wider passage, and they saw the aliens for the first time. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Species of every shape and size. Tall ones with too many legs. Short ones covered in soft fur. Floating ones that moved like jellyfish through the air. They lined both sides of the corridor, pressed against the walls, and every single one of them was staring. No one spoke, no one moved. A small creature, something like an insect the size of a child, looked up at them and let out a high, thin sound. Its parent pulled it behind its legs. Taeho kept walking. He smiled at them. Some flinched. They were met at the end of the corridor by armed guards. Not 2 or 3, 40. They carried weapons that hummed with energy, and they formed a tight circle around the 5 humans and marched them forward without a word. A great bowl, carved from dark stone, filled with thousands of seats rising up in tiers, and in every seat sat a delegate from a different world. At the center, on a throne that seemed to grow from the floor like a living thing, sat an ancient creature with silver skin and 6 slow blinking eyes. Elder Von, Grand Speaker of the Galactic Council. He looked down at them, and Taeho felt the weight of that gaze, like a hand pressing on his chest. The Elder's voice was deep and old, and filled the chamber without effort. "You have come from the sealed zone," Elder Von said. "You have broken a boundary that has stood for longer than your species has existed. Before we decide what to do with you, we must know one thing." He leaned forward. "What do you call your world?" Taeho looked up at him. He thought of his grandmother. He thought of Busan, and the sea, and the sound of rain on the roof. He thought of every human being on the small blue planet behind him. "Earth," he said. "We call it Earth." He expected silence. He expected confusion. He did not expect what happened next. The chamber broke. Not slowly, not gradually, but all at once, like glass hitting stone. Delegates screamed. Some stood and ran for the exits. Others began transmitting emergency signals, their devices flashing red and white. A species of tall bird-like creatures let out a sound so sharp that Dowa covered her ears. Elder Von did not move. He sat perfectly still on his throne, and his 6 eyes closed, one by one, as if he had just heard the one word in all the universe he had prayed he would never hear. Outside the viewport, warships began to move. Taeho looked at his crew. Nari was pale. Juno had shifted his weight to the balls of his feet. Boyoung was gripping her datapad so hard her knuckles were white. Dowa had stopped biting her nail. Her hand was shaking. "What just happened?" Taeho asked. No one answered. The alarms kept screaming. They were taken to a suite on the 14th level of the station. It was large and well furnished, with soft seats and a wide viewport that looked out into the stars. It was comfortable. It was also, very clearly, a cage. Juno found the locks in under a minute. Magnetic seals on every door, energy barriers behind the walls, and at least 12 armed guards in the corridor outside. He reported all of this to Taeho in a calm, quiet voice, the same way another man might report the weather. "We could get through them," Juno said. "Not bragging, just stating a fact." "Not yet," Taeho said. "We didn't come here to fight." Nari had already pulled out her datapad and was working. She sat on the floor with her legs crossed, scrolling through every piece of alien language data she had, replaying the moment in the council chamber over and over again. The way they had reacted, the pitch of their screams, the specific words some of them had shouted as they ran. "It's the name," she said after an hour. "It's not that they don't like us. It's that the word Earth means something to them. Something old, something terrible." "What does it mean?" Boyoung asked. "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." The next morning, if it could be called morning on a station that had no sun, Nari asked to speak with someone, anyone, a historian, a librarian, a scholar. The guards refused. She asked again. They refused again. She asked a third time, and this time she spoke in their own language, using the formal verb structure reserved for polite academic requests. The guards looked at each other. They had not expected a human to know their words. An hour later, a small alien arrived at their door. She was barely 4 feet tall, covered in soft gray feathers, with large round eyes the color of amber. Her hands had 6 fingers each, and they trembled as she held a stack of old data tablets against her chest. Her name was Tilla. She was an archivist. She was young for her kind, and she was absolutely terrified. Nari sat on the floor, so she would not tower over her. She smiled. She spoke softly. She offered Tilla water, which the alien refused, and then offered her a piece of dried fruit from Earth, which Tilla sniffed carefully, and then, to everyone's surprise, ate. "It's sweet," Tilla said quietly. "It's a persimmon," Nari said. "They grow on trees. My mother used to dry them every autumn." Tilla looked at her. Some of the fear in those amber eyes faded, just a little. "You are not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "Monsters." Nari let that word sit in the air for a moment. Then she said, "Tilla, I need to understand why everyone is afraid of us. Will you help me?" Then she opened her data tablets and began to talk. The story she told was older than any civilization in the galaxy, older than the Council, older than the Accord Station itself. It came from a time when the galaxy was young and wild, and species were just beginning to reach for the stars. In that ancient age, something had come from a small region of space near the outer arm of the galaxy, a species. The old records did not agree on what they looked like. Some said they were tall, some said they were short, some said they changed, that they were never the same twice. But every record agreed on one thing: they could not be killed. The galaxy called them the Unbroken. They had no great fleet, no planet-destroying weapons, no empire. They simply arrived, and they survived. When a plague was sent against them, their bodies learned to fight it within a generation. When their worlds were burned, they dug into the ground and lived. When they were hit with radiation that would kill any other species in hours, they adapted. Their bones grew denser. Their blood carried more oxygen. Their children were born stronger than their parents. Every weapon the ancient galaxy used against them only made them more dangerous. "They didn't conquer," Tilla said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They didn't need to. They just kept coming. They kept surviving. Every species that tried to stop them eventually exhausted itself and fell. Not because the Unbroken defeated them, but because the Unbroken simply outlasted them." Nari's throat was dry. What happened to them? The galaxy united. For the first and only time in history, every species agreed on one thing. They sealed that region of space. They built barriers. They placed warning signals on every approach. They called it the Dead Zone, and they made a law that no one would ever go there again. Tilla looked up at Nari, and her amber eyes were full of something that was not quite fear and not quite sadness. It was grief. Ancient, inherited grief. "The signal your people received," Tilla said. "It was not an invitation. It was a monitoring probe. It was designed to detect if anything intelligent ever arose in the Dead Zone again. When your people answered it and came here, the Council realized the worst had happened. The Unbroken are back," Nari said. "You are from the same world. You carry the same name. And your biology—" Tilla pulled up a file on her tablet. It showed a comparison. On one side, the genetic profile of the Unbroken, reconstructed from ancient samples. On the other side, a human genetic profile taken from the Mugunhwa's medical records. The similarities were not subtle. They were obvious. "Overwhelming. Your bones heal stronger after they break," Tilla said. "Your immune system remembers every disease it has ever fought. Your muscles grow when they are torn. You even have a chemical in your brain that blocks pain when you are badly hurt. so you can keep fighting." She paused. "No other species in the galaxy does any of these things." Nari sat very still. She thought of every scar on every human she had ever loved, every broken bone that healed, every sickness that was survived, every war that humanity walked out of, bloody and limping and alive. "We didn't know," she said. "No," Tilla agreed. "You didn't, but the galaxy has known for a very long time. And now Commander Roku is telling the Council that you must be destroyed before you remember what you are." At that moment, in a closed chamber on the far side of the station, Commander Roku stood before the Council's military committee. He was tall, armored in dark plates of living metal, and his voice was the sound of a blade being sharpened. "The humans are not innocent visitors," Roku said. "They are the descendants of the most dangerous species this galaxy has ever known. Their biology proves it. Their survival on that death world proves it. We have one chance to stop them before they realize their full potential. If we wait, it will be too late." Elder Vaughn listened. He said nothing. His 6 eyes were open, and in them was a question he could not answer. Back in the suite, Nari returned to the crew. She sat down. She looked at Tejo, and her face was white, and her hands were still. "They're not afraid of what we've done," she said. "They're afraid of what we might become." Tejo looked at her. Then he looked at his crew. Then he looked out the viewport at the warships gathering in the dark. "Then we need to show them," he said quietly, "what we choose to be." Commander Roku moved fast. Within 6 hours of the council meeting, his fleet had surrounded the Accord Station in a ring of steel and fire. 47 warships, weapons hot. Nothing entered, nothing left. He sent a message to Elder Vaughn. It was short. Hand over the humans, or he would sterilize the threat himself. He used that word, sterilize, as if they were a disease. Tejo heard about the blockade from Tilla, who came to them shaking so badly she could barely hold her tablets. Nari held her hands until the shaking stopped. Tilla said she was sorry. She said she had tried to speak to the council on their behalf, but no one would listen. Not now, not with Roku's ships outside. "We need to speak to the council ourselves," Tejo said. "They will not allow it," Tilla said. "You are confined. The order came from Roku himself." Tejo nodded slowly. He looked at Juno. Juno looked back at him. Something passed between them without words, the way it does between people who have trusted each other for a long time. "Captain," Juno said, "I can get us out." "No killing," Tejo said. "Not one, not even a scratch." Juno almost smiled. Almost. Understood. That night, or what passed for night on the station, Juno moved. He stepped into the corridor and faced the 12 guards. They were tall, heavily armed, and trained. Juno was none of these things. He was average height, average build, and dressed in a simple gray uniform. But he had been a Marine for 15 years, and he had spent a lifetime learning how bodies worked, human and otherwise. He didn't fight them. He read them. He watched the way their weight shifted, the way their eyes moved, the rhythm of their breathing. Then he moved through them the way water moved through rocks, pressing nerve clusters and pressure points that Boyoung had identified from Tilla's biological databases. One by one they folded, not in pain, in sleep, gently, like candles being blown out. The last guard managed to send a partial alert before Juno touched a spot behind what might have been its ear, and it slumped against the wall with a soft sigh. The whole thing took 19 seconds. When the security team reviewed the footage later, they would watch it 7 times, not because they didn't understand what happened, but because the human had moved so fast and so precisely that their minds refused to believe it. He had known exactly where to touch. He had known exactly how much pressure to use, and he had not hurt a single one of them. That scared them more than violence ever could have. The crew walked through the station's corridors in a tight group. Tejo in front, Juno at the rear, Nari, Boyoung, and Dohwa between them. They passed alien civilians who pressed themselves against the walls, eyes wide. A cleaning worker dropped its bucket and ran. A group of children stared from behind a doorway. Dohwa waved at the children. One of them waved back. They reached the council chamber. The great doors were sealed. Taeho placed his hand on them and looked at Bo-young. "Can you open this?" Bo-young studied the locking mechanism for about 30 seconds. Then she pulled a small tool from her belt, made 2 adjustments, and the doors slid open with a sound like a held breath being released. Inside, the full council was in session. 3,000 delegates, arguing, shouting, some of them weeping. Commander Roku's holographic image stood at the center, mid-sentence, demanding immediate action. Everything stopped when the 5 humans walked in. Roku's soldiers stationed inside the chamber raised their weapons. The humming of charged energy filled the room. Taeho looked at the weapons. He looked at the soldiers holding them. He did not stop walking. "My name is Han Taeho," he said, and his voice carried through the silent chamber as if the room itself wanted to hear him. "I am the captain of the Mugunghwa, and I am here to speak." "You were not given permission," Roku's hologram said, his voice like grinding metal. "I asked 3 times," Taeho said. "I was raised to believe that 3 is enough." He stopped in the center of the chamber and looked up at Elder Von. The old alien sat on his throne, his 6 eyes open, watching. He did not order the soldiers to fire. He did not call for removal. He simply watched, the way very old and very wise beings do when they know that something important is about to happen. Shin Bo-young stepped forward. She was not a soldier. She was not a diplomat. She was a scientist, and she believed that truth was the most powerful thing in any universe. She held up her datapad, and the chamber's display systems caught the signal and projected her files across every screen in the room. "You are afraid of us because of what we are," Bo-young said. "So let me show you exactly what we are." She showed them everything. She did not hide anything. She did not make excuses. She showed them the wars, thousands of them. Wars over land, over food, over ideas, over nothing. She showed them weapons that humans had built to kill each other. Swords and guns and bombs and things that poisoned the air and water and earth. 3,000 delegates watched in horrified silence. Then she showed them the other side. She showed them the 5 mass extinction events that had struck Earth. Asteroids, volcanoes, ice ages, each one killing nearly everything alive. And each time, life came back. Humans came back. She showed them the data. Human bones that healed stronger than before they broke. Immune systems that remembered diseases across generations. Muscles that rebuilt themselves thicker after damage. Brains that rewired themselves after injury. A species that treated its own planet's attempts to kill it as a training exercise. "You call our ancestors the unbroken," Bo-young said. "You are right. We do not break easily, but that is not the whole story." Nari stepped forward then. She connected her own device to the display, and the screens changed. Music filled the chamber. A woman's voice singing a folk song that was 300 years old. A melody so simple and so sad and so beautiful that Tilla, sitting in the archives section, began to cry without knowing why. Nari showed them paintings. She showed them poems written by people who had survived terrible things and turned their pain into words that made strangers weep. She showed them photographs of humans holding their children, feeding animals, planting trees in burned forests. She showed them a video of an old woman in a destroyed city, sweeping the steps of her broken home, because even in ruin, she wanted things to be clean. She showed them a doctor working 20 hours without sleep to save a stranger, a firefighter running into a burning building, a teacher in a refugee camp drawing letters in the dirt for children who had lost everything. The chamber was so quiet that the hum of the station itself could be heard, deep and low, like a heartbeat. Tahoe looked up at Elder Vaughn. "Yes," he said, "we are hard to kill. We have always been hard to kill. But we did not come here with weapons. We did not come here with an army. We came here because we heard a signal from the stars, and thought, maybe, after being alone for so long, we had finally found someone who wanted to talk." He paused. "We came because we wanted to be friends." The silence that followed was enormous. It filled every corner of the chamber. It pressed against the walls. 3,000 species sat in it, and did not know what to do. Then Roku's hologram flickered. "Beautiful words," he said, "but words are not proof. I have already sent my fleet to your home star. When I reach your world, we will see what you truly are." The chamber erupted. Some delegates shouted in protest, others in agreement. Elder Vaughn raised his hand for silence, but the damage was done. Tahoe felt something cold settle in his chest. He turned to Juno. Juno was already moving. "Dova," Tahoe said quietly, "I need you to get to the communications array. Can you do that?" Dova looked up at him. She was 23 years old. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were steady. "Yes, Captain," she said. Quan Dova had never been the bravest person in any room. She knew this about herself. She had joined the Mugunghwa crew not because she was fearless, but because she had a memory that forgot nothing, and a pair of hands that could operate any communication system ever built. She was useful. Being useful, she had always believed, was enough. Now she was running through the corridors of an alien space station with Big Juno at her side, and she was beginning to think that being useful and being brave might be the same thing. Juno moved ahead of her, checking corners, reading the flow of people. The station was in chaos. Roku's blockade had triggered emergency protocols, and alien civilians were flooding the corridors, trying to reach shelters. Families, workers, children, the same kinds of people you would find in any city on Earth, doing what people everywhere do when they are afraid. They called out names. Juno moved through them without touching a single one. When a group of small, frightened aliens blocked a narrow passage, he knelt down, made himself small, and gently guided them to a side corridor, pointing them toward safety. One of them, a creature with wide green eyes and 4 small hands, grabbed his finger and held on. Juno looked at it for a moment. Then he carefully freed his hand, patted the creature on what he hoped was its head, and kept moving. Dowa watched all of this. She filed it away in the part of her memory that never let go. Later she would think of it often. The most dangerous human on the ship, kneeling in a corridor, being gentle with someone else's child. They reached the communications array. It was at the heart of the station, a massive room filled with equipment that pulsed with light. It was the nerve center of the entire Accord, the place from which signals could be sent to every corner of the galaxy. It was also guarded, but the guards had left their posts to help with the evacuation. The room was empty. Dowa sat down at the main console. Her fingers moved. She had never seen this technology before, but Nari had spent weeks teaching her the alien language and communication protocols. And Dowa's memory held every lesson perfectly. She found the transmission systems. She found the broadcast frequencies. She found the amplifiers that could push a signal across 10,000 light-years. "What are you going to send?" Juno asked, standing by the door, watching the corridor. Dowa thought about it. She thought about what Roku was doing right now, flying toward Earth, with enough firepower to crack a planet. She thought about what the Council expected from humans, what the old records had taught them to fear. Monsters, destroyers, the unbroken. She could send a warning. She could tell Earth to arm itself, to prepare for war, to become everything the galaxy feared. Part of her wanted to. Part of her was angry enough to do it. But then she thought of her mother. Her mother who ran a small bakery in Daegu, and who had cried for 3 days when Dohwa left for the stars, but had packed her a bag of rice cakes anyway. She thought of her little brother, who was 9, and who believed that his sister was going to meet aliens and make friends with them. She was not going to prove him wrong. Dohwa began to build a message. Not a warning, not a weapon, a story. She pulled files from the Mugunhwa's cultural database, the one that Nari had built over years of work, the archive of everything beautiful that humanity had ever made. She selected pieces with care, the way her mother selected ingredients for bread, knowing that what you leave out matters as much as what you put in. She chose a folk song from Jindo, slow and aching, about a woman waiting for someone to come home. She chose a recording of a street musician in Seoul, playing a melody on a bamboo flute on a rainy afternoon. She chose the sound of children laughing in a schoolyard. She chose the sound of ocean waves from Jeju Island. She chose photographs. An old couple holding hands on a park bench. A farmer in a rice field at dawn, the water golden with reflected light. A group of strangers forming a human chain to rescue someone from a flood. She chose a poem, just one. 4 lines, written by a woman who had survived a war and planted a garden in the rubble of her home. Then she added the final piece. A video that Boyoung had recorded on the day they left Earth. A launch day. Millions of people had gathered to watch the Mugunhwa leave. And as the ship rose into the sky, they had done something no one planned. They had started singing. Not the same song. Different songs, in different languages, from different places. But somehow, together, it became one sound, rising. Dohwa put it all together. She formatted it so that any species with any technology could receive it, using the translation protocols Nari had developed. And then she broadcast it, not to Earth, to everyone. The signal went out from the Accord like a heartbeat, pushing through space at the speed of light, and then faster, carried by the station's amplifiers to every relay, every outpost, every world that had a receiver pointed at the sky. Billions of aliens heard it. On a desert world in the outer rim, a family of tall, thin beings, with skin like sandstone, sat around a fire and listened to the folk song from Jindo. The mother closed her eyes. She did not understand the words, but she understood the feeling. She had waited for someone once too. On a water world near the galactic core, a school of aquatic beings gathered around a public speaker and heard the children laughing. Their young ones began to make a sound that their elders had not heard in generations. They were laughing back. On a ship in Commander Roku's fleet, a young soldier sat alone in his quarters and watched the video of the launch day. He watched millions of humans singing as their ship left the ground, and he felt something crack inside his chest. Not fear, something else. Something he did not have a word for. Roku's fleet reached the Sol system 12 hours later. They dropped out of warp expecting to find defenses, weapons platforms, a species prepared for war. What they found was a welcome. Thousands of ships, small ones, civilian ones, research vessels, transport ships, even a few old satellites that had been repurposed with speakers. They hung in space around Earth like lanterns around a house. And from every one of them came music. The same music Dohwa had broadcast, the same stories, the same laughter. They did not fire. They did not flee. They floated in the dark and played their songs and waited. Roku stood on the bridge of his flagship. His weapons were charged. His fleet was ready. One word from him and Earth would burn. He looked at the planet on his screen. It was blue and white and green, and it was so small, so impossibly, laughably small, and yet it was not afraid. "Sir," his second-in-command said, "your orders?" Roku said nothing. On the Accord station, Elder Vaughn sat in his chamber and watched the broadcast. He saw the old couple on the bench. He saw the farmer in the rice field. He saw the human chain in the floodwater. He saw the mother, with the bag of rice cakes, waving goodbye to her daughter. He was very, very old. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had seen wars that burned entire star systems. He had spent his life afraid of a name. "We have made a grave error," he said. At the same moment, Tilla appeared on the public network. She had broken into the archives, the deep archives, the ones that were sealed and classified and forbidden. She broadcast their contents to every screen on the station. The full records, unedited, uncensored. And they showed something the galaxy had forgotten, or chosen to forget. The Unbroken had not been defeated. They had not been destroyed. They had stopped, on their own. They had looked at what they were becoming, at the endless cycle of survival and war and survival again. And they had made a choice. They had put down their weapons. They had found a quiet blue world on the edge of the galaxy. They had settled there. They had planted things. They had raised children. They had looked up at the stars and wondered if anyone else was out there. And slowly, across thousands of generations, they had forgotten what they were. The galaxy had not defeated humanity's ancestors. Humanity's ancestors had defeated themselves. They had chosen peace so completely that they forgot they had ever been anything else. Roku's fleet powered down its weapons, not because of an order, because every soldier on every ship had heard the music and seen the records and understood finally what they were looking at. Not monsters, just people. And then a voice came over the open channel, small and clear and steady. Kwandowa, still sitting at the communications array, her hands still on the controls, speaking to every ship and every world and every being that was listening. "We don't want to be your nightmare," she said. "We'd really like to be your neighbors." 1 year passed. 1 year since the Mugunwa docked at the Accord. 1 year since the name Earth shook the galaxy. 1 year since a young woman from Daegu sat at a communications console and played a song that changed everything. The station looked different now. Not in its structure, not in its shape, but in the way it felt. There was a warmth to it that had not been there before. A looseness in the air, as if the place had been holding its breath for a very long time, and had finally let it go. There were humans on the station now. Not many, a few hundred. Doctors, engineers, teachers, artists. They had come not as conquerors or ambassadors, but as neighbors. And they had done what humans had always done when they arrived somewhere new. They had made it home. On the station's lower level, a small cafe had opened. It was run by a woman named O Mire, who had been a cook in Incheon before she volunteered for the cultural exchange program. She served coffee and tea and a soup she had learned from her grandmother. And every morning, a line of aliens stretched down the corridor, waiting for a bowl. They did not always understand the flavors. Some of them could not even digest the food. But they came anyway, because Mire smiled at every one of them and remembered their names. And there was something about sitting in her cafe that made the galaxy feel smaller and kinder. On the medical level, human doctors worked alongside alien physicians. In the first 3 months, they had identified compounds in common Earth plants that could treat 2 alien diseases that had been considered incurable for centuries. The cures were not complex. One of them came from a mushroom, the other came from garlic. When the research was published, a delegate from a species that had lost millions to the disease stood in the council chamber and wept openly. He said he did not have words large enough for what he felt. In the engineering bays, human engineers had done what humans always do with machines. They had taken them apart, understood them, and made them better. The station's central reactor had been failing for decades, losing efficiency year by year. A team from Pohang University rebuilt its core systems in 6 weeks. When asked how they had solved a problem that had defeated alien engineers for 40 years, the team leader, A quiet man named Park Woojin shrugged and said, "We just tried different things until something worked." This answer was later studied by alien philosophers as a possible key to understanding the human mind. Tilla had become famous. She and Nari had written a book together, a cultural guide to humanity, drawn from the archives Tilla had unsealed, and from the thousands of hours Nari had spent teaching her about Earth. The book was called The Blue World, and it was required reading on 400 planets. Tilla still visited the cafe every morning. She always ordered the soup. She always sat with Nari, and they always talked too long, and the aliens at nearby tables always listened, pretending they were not. They had become, without trying, the most beloved pair on the station. And then there was Commander Roku. He had resigned from the military 3 months after the incident. He did not give a public statement. He did not explain. He simply removed his armor, folded it neatly, placed it on his commander's desk, and walked away. No one knew where he went at first. Then a station worker reported seeing him on the lower levels, sitting alone in a corridor, staring at the wall. Then someone saw him standing outside Mireille's cafe, looking through the window, but never going in. Then, one morning, he walked through the door. The cafe went silent. Every alien in the room stopped eating. Mireille looked up from behind her counter. She was a short woman with flour on her apron and gray in her hair, and she was not even slightly afraid. "Sit anywhere you like," she said. Roku sat in the corner. He ordered nothing. He just sat there, his massive frame folded into a chair too small for him, his dark eyes watching the room, watching the humans and aliens eating together, talking together, laughing together. After an hour, he stood and left without a word. He came back the next day, and the next. On the 4th day, Mireille brought him a bowl of soup without being asked. He looked at it for a long time. Then he ate it. Then he came back every day after that. One afternoon, a human child wandered into the cafe. She was 6 years old, the daughter of one of the engineers, and she had the fearless curiosity that only very young humans possess. She walked right up to Roku, this towering creature of dark metal and scarred plates, and held out a small yellow flower she had picked from the station's garden level. Roku looked at the flower. He looked at the child. His hands, which had commanded warships and ordered the destruction of worlds, did not know what to do. He took the flower. He held it between 2 fingers as if it were made of glass. The child smiled at him and ran away. Roku sat there for a long time after that, holding the flower, saying nothing. Mireille saw his eyes, and she looked away to give him privacy, because she understood that some moments are too big for an audience. On the day of the ceremony, the Grand Council Hall was full, every seat taken, every species represented. The 5 crew members of the Mugunghwa stood at the center, in the same spot where they had stood 1 year ago, as strangers and suspects and objects of terror. Elder Vaughn rose from his throne for the last time. He was retiring. He had said that he had lived long enough to see the thing he feared most become the thing that gave him the most hope. That was enough for any life. He read a new decree into the galactic record. His voice was old and thin, but it filled the chamber the way a river fills a valley. "Let it be known," he said, "that the name Earth is no longer a warning. From this day it is a promise that even the deepest fear can become the brightest hope. A promise that the unknown is not always a threat. A promise that strength and kindness are not enemies, but partners. We were afraid of this name for 1,000,000 years. We were wrong for every one of them." The chamber was silent. Then slowly it began. A sound, a rhythm. Hundreds of species, each in their own way, making the sound that their cultures used for approval, for agreement, for joy. It was not applause, not exactly. It was bigger than that. It was a galaxy exhaling. Han Teho stood at the podium. He looked out at the thousands of faces. He was not a man who gave speeches easily. He was a captain, not a poet. But Nari had told him to speak from the heart, and his heart had only one story to tell. When I was a boy, he said, my grandmother lived in a house in Busan that had been destroyed twice. Once by a storm, once by a war. Both times she rebuilt it with her own hands. And both times, the first thing she did was plant her garden again. Not the walls, not the roof. The garden. He paused. The translation software carried his words to every ear in the chamber. I asked her once why she planted the garden first. She said, Taeho, walls keep things out. Gardens invite things in. Always build the invitation before the barrier. He looked at Elder Vaughn. He looked at the corner of the hall where Commander Roku sat, alone, with a small yellow flower tucked into his belt. We are not here to be feared, Taeho said. We are here to plant gardens. He stepped down. The sound in the chamber grew. Nari was smiling. Juno was standing very straight, and if someone looked closely, they might have seen that his eyes were wet. Boyoung was holding Tilla's hand. Dowa was looking at her feet, trying not to cry, and failing. Later that evening, when the ceremony was over, and the delegates had gone home, and the station was quiet, Dowa stood alone at a viewport on the observation deck. The stars were spread before her like spilled light, and she watched them the way she used to watch the night sky from her mother's rooftop in Daegu. She heard small footsteps behind her. She turned. A child stood there, an alien child, small and gray-feathered, with wide amber eyes, one of Tilla's people. The child looked up at her. Is it true, the child asked, that your people cannot be broken? Dowa knelt down, so she was at the child's height. She thought about the question. She thought about Earth's history, about everything they had survived, about the wars and the plagues and the ice and the fire. She thought about her mother crying at the launch. She thought about Juno being gentle with frightened children in a corridor. She thought about Taeho's grandmother planting flowers in the ruins. We can be broken, she said. We break all the time. We break so often that we've gotten very good at it. The child tilted its head, confused. Dowa smiled. But we always put ourselves back together, every single time. That's not because we're strong. It's because we're stubborn. And because we love too many things to stay down for long. Then it smiled, the way children smile everywhere in every galaxy, with its whole face. I think I like your people, the child said. I think I like yours too, Doha said. They stood together at the viewport, the human and the alien child, and watched the stars. Out there somewhere, Earth was spinning, small and blue and impossible. A world of people who broke and healed and broke again, and never ever stopped getting back up. The stars shone on, and the galaxy, for the first time in 1,000,000 years, was not afraid.